Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. There's no question about the importance of AM radio to my constituents in central and southeastern Ohio. Farmers rely on AM radio for their weather and crop reports, and as you mentioned in your testimony, Mr. Chapman, individuals and families living in broadband deserts rely on AM to stay connected to their communities. Mr. Chapman, in your testimony, you often refer to the AM signal as resilient. Can you please briefly explain the difference between AM and FM signals and why you believe the AM signal is more resilient than the FM?
Congressman, thank you for the question. Touching on the difference in properties, say, for example, between AM and FM, the FM signal is much shorter. The AM signal is a much longer wavelength. And what that means is a longer wavelength travels a much larger distance. So that's one of the properties. It also will go through solid objects, unlike what a shorter FM signal will. So there's ways that it can certainly adapt. And in the evening, for example, you know, those that might listen to an AM radio station hear one from a great distance away. So there's different things that are signal properties that are really important to the AM band that the FM band doesn't possess.
Okay, thank you. As my colleague, Ms. Fletcher, said, a lot of the questions have been asked, but in a little different dynamic here. We have been hearing a lot about the analog versus the digital AM radio signals. In 2020, the FCC issued a report and order authorizing AM radio stations to voluntarily transition to an all-digital signal. Back to you again, Mr. Chapman. I apologize. Do any of your AM radio stations broadcast on a digital signal, and can you explain the benefits and drawbacks of digital AM radio signal versus a traditional analog signal?
Congressman Balderson, I would welcome the opportunity if it was a good opportunity for us to transition to digital AM. Unfortunately, most of our listeners can't receive digital signals on the AM band. There's differences in the receivers and such, and so for the same reason, it's important to keep AM radio in cars in its current format. It's important for us to give access to all Americans for AM in its current form, and it would require a change of receiver standards, which is a different question entirely. And so the reason we don't make that transition is people wouldn't hear us any longer.
Okay. Do you know if any of the AM stations operating as FEMA primary entry points currently broadcast through a digital signal?
No, they do not.
All right, thank you. You're all done from my questioning. Mr. Schmidt, thank you for being here. In the case of electric vehicles, the batteries interfere with the AM signal, requiring filters or shielding to be installed to prevent interference. Following up on my question to Mr. Chapman, is this interference only an issue with the traditional analog AM signal, or would we see the same interference occur with the digital receiver installed with electric vehicles?
Unfortunately, I am, again, a safety engineer, and so I don't have the expertise on that at this moment, but I can certainly bring that back to you.
Okay. Did you want to raise your hand, Mr. Chapman?
Electromagnetic interference has different properties for each band, but if it affects AM, chances are it would affect FM also, whether it was in the digital or the analog structure. And so the shielding that takes place in cars needs to protect AM and FM, and that's generally how they're designed.
Okay. Thank you very much for all of you being here today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my remaining time.